Hey everyone, this is Adam Bryant. I'm the co-author of a new book called The CEO Test, Master the Challenges That Make or Break All Leaders. On today's show, we're going to be talking about why a lot of the leaders think they're good listeners, but actually aren't, and it's a dangerous place to be for them. We're going to talk about the paradoxes of leadership and how you need to be as a leader and how you can be calm and confident and credible as a leader. And finally, we're going to talk about the art of simplifying complexity, which is probably the one art form that runs through all the 700 plus interviews that I've done with leaders over the last dozen years. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to our delicious conversation with Adam Bryant. He is the co-author of a book, brand new book, which is published by the Harvard Business Review called The CEO Test, Master the Challenges That Make or Break All Leaders. It is a fascinating book because it really is about narrowing it down and taking out all the fluff and all the contradictions that in this tsunami of leadership development books are. I'm old enough that I can remember the beginning of the New Age, which is what it was called, where personal development books were one little shelf in the bookstore. Now there are bookstores that are just personal development. And in those bookstores, you would find an also little shelf which was called leadership, right? And now there are entire bookstores that are leadership. It's become a tsunami. And the wonderful thing about this book is it's about brushing all that to the side and saying, hold on a second, what is it really about? What's the practicality of it? What makes it work? What doesn't make it work? And one of the things we were talking about just before we took a break was that leadership is difficult because it's filled with paradoxes. Some of the examples that Adam gave were, we need to be very empathetic now as leaders, of course, but at the same time, you've got to hold people accountable. That's a paradox. And there are millions of them. Just keep going over and over and over, right? Be patient with people, but make sure that people hit their deadlines. Hold on a second. If you don't go mad doing all that thing, it can be pretty challenging. So we were talking about standing in the middle of those paradoxes when we finished up. Walk us through a little bit about that, Adam, as you do in your work as a consultant, but even in the way that you lay it out in the book. How do we help people? How do we help leaders to grasp that this is not about being rigid? Because oftentimes people take these things in these books and go, okay, I've got to be this way. And I don't think it's about that. Maybe you do. So tell us.
Sure. And to me, it's a two-step process. And the first one is just kind of an awareness of the paradoxes. Like we've mentioned a bunch of them already, but just, taking a blank sheet of paper and just writing as many pairs as you've experienced and can think of. We talked about empathetic versus kind of urgent versus patient. There's a paradox we discuss in the book that I call both reading the weather and setting the weather. And this is this idea that there are some people, and I've worked with CEOs who have incredible antenna for just kind of reading the room and feeling like, the culture of the company, reading the weather. But we always tell them, it's like, as the leader, you're actually setting the weather system, right? People are picking up on your energy and your signals. And that is another paradox. And so I think the first step is being aware of them. And then the second part of it is to have a really, honest moment of reflection, take an inventory of what you're good at. And with each of those pairs, I think we can ask ourselves, like, which way do we skew on each of those, right? Like I managed teams of reporters for 14 years. I was skewed towards more empathetic. It's just kind of the way I'm built. And if I had a do-over, I'd probably flex more often on more of the, there are some moments where you got to pound the table, right?
Right.
I think of Jamie Dimon right now and all this sort of back to work conversation. And he was quoted in an article saying, I know commuting sucks, so what? Right? He's not showing any empathy there, but he's saying, I think for the good of the organization, I believe it's better for everybody to come to work. And that was just a classic moment where it's nope, I'm I know a lot of people aren't going to like this, but I'm doing what's right for the organization. So to me, it's really, just that sense of being honest with yourself. Like, what are you good at? And then you ask the questions like, okay, well, if that's one side of the paradox, do I need to be better at the other side of the paradox? And what would I do? And just being aware of those moments, because it's all about just getting in that space where it's like the emails coming in, somebody's walking to your office, and it's going to be about one of those paradoxes, right? Like your reaction is ultimately going to flow out of one of those paradoxes. And just knowing it's like, oh, recognizing this is one of those moments when I need to do X, because sometimes people overuse hockey metaphors, but you're in Canada, Dov, I'm Canadian, so I'm going to use a hockey metaphor, right? But it's like everybody talks about slowing the game down for hockey players, right? And to me, like ultimately as a leader, that's what you want to do. And I think this idea of being able to label dynamics in the moment. Somebody comes into you with rather than saying, this is a brand new problem, I have no idea how to deal with this, to be able to instantly say, okay, this is one of those situations that requires me to be empathetic. And if you could really quickly label it and then understand how to move it to, maybe the other side of the paradox, maybe that's ultimately where you need to drive it. That's just going to let you hold on to more of the psychic energy you need to be an effective leader.
So it's interesting because you've just brought up something which is understanding the flexibility and the need for it, because things are constantly changing, and never more so than right now. So and that, I think that never more so than right now is something you could say at any point in time, but we really are saying it right now because we've just, I can't say come through, but we are, we've been in a global pandemic. There are people who are going, we got to get back to normal and go back to work, like you talked about Jamie Dimon. And there are others who are going, well, we got to really adapt and change and blah, blah, blah. And I think as a leader, you're going to make a decision that you decide is best. Okay. But you also have to have, that, as you said, that's setting the weather, but you also have to pay attention to the weather, because if you say, okay, everybody's got to come back and you're in the great resignation and there's nobody to come back, you are, to use a British term, bollocksed, right? You're just knackered. There's nothing you can do. So talk to us a little bit about that, because I think we have to address that. It's the elephant in the room is, okay, all this is the things to do, but now here's the tsunami that's happened. People are going, it's the great resignation. And for me, one of the things I talk about, even in my private work with my clients as a mentor and as an advisor, and even in my corporate work, is, you know what this great resignation is? And they go, well, yeah, people don't want to come out. I go, no. Do you know what's firing it? And they go, well, COVID. And I go, no, COVID was an opportunity. And they go, well, what is it? And I go, it's a crisis in meaning. And they go, what do you mean? People suddenly slowed down enough to say, what the am I doing? Why am I doing this? Yeah. Does it really matter? I'm fighting to get up this ladder and get another 20 grand, 30 grand, 100 grand a year. And actually, I didn't make as much money. I stayed home, got to spend some time with my kids. And, I don't mind wearing sweatpants with my tie for a meeting. Yeah. So maybe I don't want to be in the office. Maybe I don't care as much about the ladder. Maybe I don't care about a bigger house or a Porsche, because I don't want to do those things.
Yeah.
There's this crisis in meaning. So that's why I want to address that with you right now, because I think that this right now, this crisis in meaning, is in many ways the ultimate CEO test.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I often reflect on the fact that you and I we all are living through this breathtaking moment of change, right? Like you imagine somebody 50 years from now writing about the history of the corporation, like they're going to devote 3 chapters to literally this moment we're in right now. And, it's sort of the nature of work itself, right? The role of companies in society to, take on a lot of the challenges that governments can't or aren't. and the nature of leadership itself, like more empathy, more humanity, more authenticity. So I think it's just this breathtaking moment. And it does speak to one of these paradoxes, because employees increasingly feel like they want to have a voice and a vote in the company's decisions, right? Which gets at some of the meaning, that sense of like, I'm sort of a citizen of this company.
Yes.
And I do want to vote. We're seeing that all the time, right? Like workers at Ford Motor Company said, I don't want to be building cop cars anymore after George Floyd. And at Google say, I don't want to be doing Defense Department work. At Hachette Publishing, the editor said, we're not going to publish this Woody Allen memoir, and we're walking out. So that creates this just incredible leadership challenge. And in some ways, my shorthand for it, Dov, is I call it the era of the whatabouts. And I imagine a CEO on a stage, actual or metaphorical, at an all hands meeting. And they just have to be prepared more and more for employees to say, what about this? And what about that? Mm-hmm. And almost to be prepped like a politician is to have an answer for any question. And because increasingly employees are feeling like, as part of that sort of purpose meaning, it's like voter suppression, like what are we doing about that? And that is an enormous challenge. So getting back to this idea of paradox, you have to acknowledge what people are saying. People feel like you have to make people feel as if they're being heard. On the other hand, you can't just spend all your time listening to people and responding to them, because pretty soon you're going to alienate half your staff, right? If you start issuing policy positions. So to me, and what I'm seeing the most forward-thinking leaders do is to sort of take that dynamic, that this what about era that we're in effect to play offense and to say up front, these are the 2 or 3 issues that matter to us as a company. This is why they matter to us. They're part of our history. They're core to our customers. Some narrative about why we are picking these 3 issues. Then this is what we are doing about them. We're not just talking about them. And then saying, like, if you are passionate about a topic, we encourage you to pursue that in your personal time. But this is what we're doing as a company. If you disagree with it, this isn't a prison. You can go work somewhere else, but this is who we are and what we stand for. And to me, that helps kind of quiet the, what about this? What about that? What about this?
Yeah. And again, in the work I do is that I say that your company has to stand for something beyond profit. And the purpose of that is to get people off the fence. Like people say, should we just be building a wider fence to hold more people? I'm like, no, build a narrower fence and push people off so that they know which side of that fence they're on. Yep, we're with you. We agree with this. Or, you know what? Screw you. We're out. I'm going to go work somewhere else. And that can feel terribly threatening, but it's also very clear then, because as a leader, as an organization, we know what we stand for and we will stand by that. Of course, we'll adapt and we need to maybe constantly re-examine, but we're not going to be bending with the wind of whatever's showing up. Otherwise, we become very, we don't have any substance. And we see this recent research done even at the early end of the first quarter, beginning of second quarter of 2021, research was done that consumers are trusting less and less companies who take a socially active stance. Right? And he's like, well, hold on a second. Don't we have to take a social stance? Yes, but you can't just say it. Like they don't trust you because you say this and you put a little black square up for George Floyd on Instagram, and you never did anything.
Right.
Or you say, we're all diversified. Yeah, you are in the workplace, but all your upper management are all whitey.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, yeah,
Exactly.
It's not real.
Yeah. And
that's the thing.
I'm totally with you. And so many companies are, they're really like purpose and meaning. And I saw a headline the other day: companies are appointing chief purpose officers.
Right.
And I find myself looking at a lot of these purpose statements, and it's sort of what you said. It's like it's a very wide fence. Like nobody could argue with them. And some of them do remind me. There's that great scene in that HBO series Silicon Valley where all these CEOs are pitching their company and they all say the same thing at the end. They got this arcane technology bit. They go, to make the world a better place. And yes, of course, right, as opposed to what?
I was going to say, you're back to as opposed to what? As opposed to let's screw up the planet.
Right. And so I with all these statements, I'm just looking for some level of specificity, right? Because it's just easy to have big kind of empty calorie words and phrases that nobody would take our issue with, but there's just not a lot of meaning there. And if you're really going to put up a billboard and say, this is our purpose, to me, there's got to be something there. Otherwise, don't do it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you've dedicated an entire chapter to in the book that I think we've got to bring up here, because it's totally in line with what we're saying, is listening. That often leaders are very bad listeners. And when I say bad listeners, I want to be clear. Some of them are bad listeners because they're just arrogant knobs who don't listen. And some of them are bad listeners because they listen to everyone and everything and don't have a stance. Talk to us about what you've laid out in the book there, because I think that's really important for people to get.
Yeah, and to me, it starts with the fact that of self-awareness. Like you've got to be aware as a leader that you are trapped in a bubble, and the higher you go in the organization, the more pretty much every piece of information that's coming to you is compromised. You're being spun, you're being managed, people are hiding stuff from you. And the first step is self-awareness. There's that great scene in The Sopranos where, Tony's wife sort of plants the seed that the guys who work for him is flunkies and they laugh at his stupid jokes because he's their boss. And so he decides to test their theory. So he's playing poker with them and he tells this like really stupid joke. And then the camera does this slow pan around the table and all these guys are laughing at him like he's Dave Chappelle, well, at least right. Before Dave Chappelle was super controversial. But it's captured in this idea of careful how funny your jokes become. And I have seen that. I've been in meetings in my career where it's like the boss tells a joke and it's like, wasn't that funny? But boy, there's some people who just doubled over. Right. And so like, to me, like that's the important insight. You have to realize that you're being spun, that people withholding stuff, they're saying 2 thumbs up, everything's great, boss, when in fact it's not. And so once you recognize that, then you have to provide this incredible counterweight to that and almost see it as building an ecosystem, an infrastructure of listening so that you get reliable information. And you just do that a lot of different ways, whether it's sort of breakfast meetings, skip level meetings, there's all sorts of ways to do it. My co-author, Kevin, when he was running Amgen in the annual employee survey, he would ask an open field question, which is, what do you think of the job that Kevin's doing? And all those employees could respond anonymously. And so he would gather all those responses. And, as he liked to say, with an adult beverage nearby, he would read them and get that feedback. But he would go out on sales calls with salespeople, just recognizing that you have to do that. And it all stems from, like, if Kevin were on this call with us, Dov, he would be the first to tell you that he was a horrible listener when he was younger, and it worked for him. I mean, he says, like, in those early meetings, somebody came into his office, he goes, look, I know what you're going to tell me. This is what you're going to tell me. So why don't we save that time? And this is what I'm going to tell you. And this is what you should do. And he said it worked for him for a long time until it didn't. And Amgen had this huge crisis, and he had this moment of reflection where he realized, I have to own this. And a big part of what I didn't do was sort of pick up on the signals. So literally transformed the way he listened. And then so to me, it's like at a leadership level, you have to have that ecosystem, that infrastructure. But then there's also just that art form of listening in the moment, one-on-one in any context in life. And the older I get, the more I feel like there's less listening going on in our society. I like that phrase that a lot of conversations are just serial monologues, right? Like people just waiting for each other to stop talking. Our devices aren't helping, right? We're getting out of that practice. And I just think, to me, like listening is the underrated superpower of leadership, because if you do it well, you're going to learn a lot. Employees are going to feel like they're being heard. It's just the benefits of it are just sort of almost infinite.
But it is a huge challenge. And it's a huge challenge because even if you dedicate yourself to listening, you can't dedicate others to speaking. So it's really about creating that safe space for them to do that. And outside of creating a space, as you just talked about, for anonymity, how is the CEO doing as a job? And you can put down, and I don't know whether you are the janitor or the VP of whatever. I think that that's a great thing to do. It's kind of like reading your own mean tweets, but at the same time, in the moment, I mean, I've often said this. I've actually said this on these shows that, I remember working with a company, and this leader I was working with really thought he was doing a great job, and I could see he was doing a terrible job. And I said, do people get to tell you what they're unhappy with? He goes, oh yeah, I encourage that all the time. And I was like, okay. So I said, all right, tell me who's the number one person who, and I had the whole executive team with me. I said, tell me the number one person who answers to you, blah, blah, blah. And they all went through it. Tell me their number one job. They all went through it. And I said, you're wrong. And they go, what do you mean? How can you say that's not their number one job? I said, it's not their number one job. It's their number one job to you, but it's not their number one job to them. They go, well, what do you mean? I go, their number one job to them is to keep you happy. That's it. And they go, what do you mean? You write the paycheck. You decide if they get to pay the rent next week. You decide if their kids are going to go to school. Of course, their number one job is to keep you happy. So what are they going to say? You suck? No, that's not going to happen. So you're not going to get the truth. This is the problem. So outside of creating anonymity for people or giving them an opportunity to have anonymous feedback, how do you do that? What have you found these CEOs are able to do that creates that safety beyond going, I'm listening, and they go, yeah, I don't trust you.
Right. And
inside their own head, at least.
Exactly. And getting over that trust speed bump is huge. And I think the way you do it is that you kind of make a big show of it. And you say to people, maybe at all hands meeting on leadership team, it's like, I was thinking X, and Jane, pulled me aside and said, you're getting this flat ass wrong. You need to do this. And I was glad she did that. And because of that conversation, we are doing that. And because people just pick up on the signals, I think culture is determined by, who are the heroes, right? So if you create a culture and call out the heroes of people who've taken you on, and you say, I was so glad. And once people go, wait a minute, that's actually how to get ahead here, then they're going to start doing that.
That's a very good point.
So very good point. To me, it's like always comes back to like, who are the heroes you're creating? What are the narratives?
So you talked about at the beginning of this part, you talked about that you'd spent all those years as a journalist, you were editor, you ran teams. I mean, you were a leader, but it was in a journalistic place. Talk to us a little bit about the transition, because it's everybody's. I don't know, it's everybody's dream, but I imagine it's everybody in the journalistic stream to New York Times editor. Oh my God, like, wow, that's the Oscars of journalism. Maybe not too much today because there's so much crap in the air about journalism, but you've gone from that to this leadership world. It seems like a jump.
And it is from a certain angle, but what's been interesting is that from another angle, I feel like in many ways I'm using a lot of my same muscles. And I think a couple of them come to mind, or sort of muscles I built or insights I've had. So the first, I spent 15 years as a reporter and 15 years as an editor. And a big part of my job as an editor at the New York Times, back when the print paper really mattered and page one really mattered, the art form, one of the art forms of journalism is simplifying complexity, right? And to be able to sort of crystallize everything and explain it clearly and simply. And a big part of my job as an editor is I was working with all these reporters and help them get their stories in shape, and not only editing them, but I would have to go into a meeting with 40 people who were staring at me impatiently. And I had to, like, in 12 words, kind of nail the pitch of the story. Right. And this was like going to the gym every single day for simplifying complexity. And so I came to understand the importance of it, how to do it. And to me, now that I'm in the corporate world, it's like I see so much of some of the challenges that leaders have because they have not simplified complexity enough. Right. This idea, it's like you think that strategy slide that you're showing is simple and clear, but it's not. Right. And Dov, you've seen those strategy slides, right? There's 7 bullet points on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, there's a tiered colored pyramid with corkscrew arrows and lots of labels to explain everything. And you look at it and go, yeah, I guess that kind of sort of makes sense, but then you forget it 20 seconds later.
Right.
And so that sort of relentless push to simplify, but not oversimplify complexity, I think is true in journalism, and it's really true in business as well. The second insight that I had as an editor working with reporters is I would often talk to them before they sat down to write their story. If it was like a feature that they'd been working on or investigative piece they spent a lot of time on, I'd say, just before you start writing, tell me about how you're going to get into the top of the story. And very often I would discover when I asked them that, it's like, oh, they're too close to this subject. So I would have the conversation. I try to disarm them with humor. I would say to them, Dov, you are suffering from the most noble affliction of great reporters. You are suffering from expertitis, right? You are too close to this subject. And what I'm also understanding in business is that when you grow up in an industry, when you grow up inside a company, you get to that CEO job, that those very often you can suffer from expertitis.
Yep.
And what is crystal clear in your head, it's not crystal clear to the person you've just hired on the front lines. And so trying to help leaders understand that gap exists between clarity in their head and everybody else. And first of all, awareness that it exists, and then how do you close it? Like, that is a huge part of what we do.
Yeah, I think that's a great place for us to finish. It's a great place because I think that leadership is, as we've said all the way through, is so many things. It is so many things, but simplifying complexity might be one of the greatest skills of a great leader.
I think so.
I'm a great lover of movies, and I'm a story writer. I write stories and tell story and do all those things. And I watch movies and I'm like, or even a TV show that's 30 minutes, and I'm like, how the hell did they get those 3-4 storylines to run together in 22 minutes? Wow. And I know it's not the writing. I know it's not the acting. It's the editor. The person who gets the least amount of credit, it's the editor. Right? I give my stuff to my editor and I'm like, yeah, this is 1,200 words. It needs to be 7. And I have no idea how to get it to 7 because I am so attached to every single word. Please murder the babies.
Right, exactly.
So exactly. Thank you. It's superb. I just can't thank you enough, Adam. It's really a valuable conversation, delicious. And I think there's so much here for everybody. Again, I want to ask you to please share with everybody where they can find out more about you, about your book, and about the resources that you make available.
That's great. It's my personal website is adambryantbooks.com, all one word. And our firm is the XCO Group, but our website is XCO Leadership, EXCO-leadership.com. And thank you, Dov. I mean, it's an honor to be on your show.
Thank you, sir. It was genuinely a pleasure and an honor. I think there's a ton here for everybody to find out. As I said, we will make sure that all the links are published in the show notes. And remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders. You can chat about this episode that you've been listening to or any of our past episodes. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast in Facebook or LinkedIn. There's groups there for that. The truth is that it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your true capability. To find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist, For yourself or your organization, go to dovbaron.com. If you don't know what I'm laughing at, it means you didn't listen to part one. Go back and listen to that. Unified meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and for companies. So I want to thank you for sharing this show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about whether you would pass the CEO test. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.